Greetings to all of you out there in the world at large, but greetings especially for those of you who are VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this report. The big news this week is that Great Britain, Australia, and Canada made a joint declaration on Sunday afternoon, Israel time, that they are recognizing a Palestinian state, followed a few hours later by Portugal. Well, meanwhile, Israel is apparently very close to a security agreement with the Al-Jolani regime in Syria. The IDF is making rapid progress in the campaign to finish off Hamas and take full control of Gaza City. And an absurd conspiracy theory about Israel assassinating Charlie Kirk is gaining traction in the MAGA movement. All of that just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Yes, friends, we must start this week's broadcast with some very sad news. On Sunday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that his government is extending diplomatic and legal recognition to a Palestinian state.
And a two-state solution. That means a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state.
He accompanied his announcement with some tough talk about Hamas, which is all fine and good, but in the final analysis, that doesn't really count for much. Hamas seems to be aware of that because they quickly issued a statement thanking Starmer for his action, and for the record, Palestinian Authority head Mahmoud Abbas did as well, in quick succession, so that it was pretty obvious that they'd coordinated beforehand. The prime ministers of both Canada and Australia issued similar announcements, followed a few hours later by Portugal. It can be expected that in the next few days, several more Western countries will do the same. Now, I have a lot to say about this, but first, regular viewers of this broadcast will know that I often talk about my mentor, Derek Prince. He was one of the most remarkable men I ever knew, and I know millions of people all over the world have learned a lot from reading his many books and listening to the large online archive of his sermons and lectures. There is one in particular that I commend to everyone, and you can find it by doing a search on YouTube or in other social media about Why Israel, Derek Prince. In that message, which was recorded in July 1998 in Cornwall, England, Derek makes a compelling biblical case for why Christians should support Israel and what role Israel is prophesied to play in God's plans and purposes for the entire human race. But the part I found most interesting as I was re-watching this video recently was his commentary on the role his native country, Great Britain, had played in the formation of the modern state of Israel. Now, as most of you probably know, the British Army conquered the Levant and drove out the Ottoman Turks during the First World War, taking Jerusalem a few days before Christmas in 1917. You may remember the film Lawrence of Arabia. It's a long film, but worth watching. Well, this just happened a few weeks after the British government issued the famous Balfour Declaration, which included a declaration of intent by the British government to help establish a Jewish national home in this country. That got British involvement in the Zionist project off to a good start. And in the months that followed, the British Army took the rest of the Holy Land and also pushed the Turks all the way north to the present-day borders. Now, in the aftermath of the war, the League of Nations granted a mandate to govern what would later become Syria and Lebanon to France, and it granted a mandate for most of the rest of the inhabited areas in the Middle East to Great Britain. It was the height of the British Empire, and it also was the beginning of the end of that institution, because in the years following, the record of the administration in what became known as the British Mandate for Palestine was very mixed. The promise made in the Balfour Declaration was mostly forgotten, and in 1921, the British decided to give a very large chunk of the land that was supposed to be designated for a Jewish state to another entity by creating the Emirate of Transjordan, which would later become the State of Jordan. Now, Derek Prince points to that decision as the beginning of the end of the British Empire, and over the following years, many more decisions would be made that culminated in what was here in Jerusalem to see in the years immediately following World War II, when he says, quote, "The British administration did everything short of open warfare to prevent the formation of the State of Israel," unquote. Now, despite all of that, the State of Israel did in fact come into existence on May 14, 1948, and in the months and years that followed, the British Empire simply vanished. One colony after another, starting with India, Pakistan, and what later would be called Bangladesh, declared their independence. Derek Prince lived in Jerusalem for many more years after the establishment of the State of Israel and watched these events taking place firsthand. I have heard many of those stories 100 times, including from the mouth of Derek himself, as I used to live with him for 6 years here in Jerusalem. But I am still amazed and deeply saddened at the way Britain started out so well, but has sunk to such depths. Now, it has to come to this, with Britain making the decision to recognize a Palestinian state and dragging Canada and Australia along with them. They were both part of the British Commonwealth in 1917 when the Balfour Declaration was issued, and they also have now come full circle. As I said before, several other Western countries and over 140 nations have already voted to recognize a Palestinian state in the United Nothings, or the United Nations as they call it. This will do absolutely nothing to help anyone in Gaza, but it will give the jihadists the idea that they're winning, that terrorism works, and they should do more of it. After Israel has decisively defeated Hamas, Hezbollah, and even Iran itself on the kinetic battlefield, these Western countries are handing our enemies, who are also their enemies, a political and diplomatic victory wrapped up with a bow and served up on a silver platter. Shame on you. Well, for that matter, Israeli officials are openly warning that a second round of warfare with Iran is more likely than not, sooner rather than later, and they're making preparations accordingly. Now, Vision for Israel, our organization, is also making such preparations, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Remember, our motto is, when crisis comes, it's too late to prepare, so now is the time to prepare. But there's one more thing I need to say, and it goes like this. I've said many times that I'm not a prophet, but you don't have to be a prophet to know that we're in prophetic times. God is on the move in the world today, and so is the enemy. And a lot of things which have been moving rather slowly for a long time might begin moving much faster. And it could happen very unexpectedly. 6 months ago today, no one was talking about the UK, Canada, and Australia recognizing a Palestinian state, with other Western countries and over 100 countries all around the world not far behind. But here we are. I don't think we'll have to wait long for the negative consequences of this decision, including an increase in terrorist attacks here in Israel and the very real possibility that our many enemies, thinking they smell blood in the water, could take this moment to pile on. Those are some of the negative consequences we need to be careful about here in Israel. But I am expecting much worse negative consequences to start playing out in these countries, which have now taken this very public stand in defiance of the living God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people. Once more, I don't claim to be a prophet, but I'm gonna make a prediction that if the next president of the United States doesn't stay in the same lane and track as President Donald Trump, who has proven himself to be the best friend of Israel, the United States itself could also slide into this deception. So I pray for the United States of America, and I'm praying also for all of your countries out there to get back in the lane and track with God. There are all kinds of reasons why any of this can happen, but one of the biggest reasons can be summed up in the word Qatar, and all the money that country has pumped into the United States and other Western countries. This has bought them influence and sympathy in many places at all levels of government, and in many non-governmental centers of power, especially universities and big corporations. President Trump is standing firm as an ally of Israel, but he won't be president of the United States forever. Germany and Japan are also notable for their refusal to go along with the crowd and recognize a Palestinian state for now. But that's the way the trends are going, and sooner or later, as the Bible very clearly tells us, all the nations of the world will come up against Israel. Now that leads some difference of opinion on how to interpret that verse. But I just want to caution all of you nations out there, get back with God and do it right now. because he is the God of Israel, the God of the land of Israel, the God of the Jewish people in Israel, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has given this land to their descendants forever and ever. Now that day is coming, and it's coming fast. And before it comes, there is a window of opportunity for the wise and discerning among us to take care of outstanding business, so that if we are caught up in something and we end up standing before the Lord sooner than we expected to, we'll be ready. If anyone has something they need to ask forgiveness for, or apologize to someone for, or to give forgiveness for, or anything like that, don't wait another day, friends. Call the person you had a falling out with and apologize for the mistakes you made while forgiving them for the mistakes they made. It might be painful, and it might be embarrassing, and they might not apologize for anything, which might leave you feeling like a sucker. But trust me, this is the right path. And if they don't admit their mistakes and reconcile with you, they will pay a fearsome price for it, while you will escape that price. That's how it works in the kingdom of God. Another kingdom principle that I urge you to keep in mind is that the state of Israel, for all its faults, failures, mistakes, and shortcomings, is a project ordained by the God described in the Bible in his Son, Yeshua HaMashiach Adonenu, Yeshua our Lord. If you call yourself a disciple of Yeshua, you need to be praying for the success of this project, and if you can do more than pray, I urge you to do so, and I hope you'll consider allowing Vision for Israel to be the agency with which you bless Israel. The decision by so many Western countries to recognize a Palestinian state will almost certainly cause many problems for Israel in the short to medium term, including economic problems, and we're already dealing with many such problems as a result of this war. Our tourism industry is operating at a fraction of its former tempo. The agricultural sector is also in very bad shape, and the port of Eilat has been almost completely shut down for most of the last 2 years. Many other engines of the economy are sputtering along. Many people are out of work. The government is preparing to raise taxes and cut services, and many families are struggling. Now, Vision for Israel, that is visionforisrael.com, is doing all we can to be a blessing in the midst of these very difficult times. So please, I ask you to watch this short video about how you can be a partner and part of the blessing. Welcome back, friends. Now, we spent most of the first half of this report talking about some bad diplomatic news for Israel, but there was also some good news this week. That's because the Al-Jolani regime, which maintains a fragile grip on Syria, is ready to sign a security agreement with Israel. I heard it's at 99% almost there. It will reportedly allow the IDF to continue its deployment on Mount Hermon and other strategic points in southern Syria that are considered necessary to protect that border. Now, although this is not a full normalization agreement like Israel has already signed with the UAE, it is a step in that direction, and probably the best that could be hoped for at this time. For its part, Syria is getting the lifting of U.S. sanctions, which will allow money from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other wealthy U.S. allies to flow into Syria to rebuild the country and provide badly needed jobs and services to its long-suffering population. Other interested parties include Turkey and several European countries which have been hosting Syrian refugees for many years now and would very much like to see those refugees go home. So this security arrangement that Syria and Israel are on the verge of signing has the potential to produce a lot of good results for a lot of countries, very much including Israel. Now, with that piece of good news having been shared, let's continue with the rest of the news, which is a mix of good and bad. To start with, 5 IDF divisions are now engaged to one degree or another in the effort to take full control of Gaza City. This is the last holdout of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist organizations, which have used Gaza as a launchpad for attacks against Israelis for decades, culminating in the atrocities, the massacre of October 7, 2023. As has been widely reported, nearly half of the Strip's 2.2 million residents were living in Gaza City until a few weeks ago, when the IDF began broadcasting messages to them that they needed to evacuate because the final showdown between Israeli forces and what's left of Hamas was about to start. Slowly at first, then in larger and larger numbers, these residents have been evacuating the city despite the efforts of Hamas, which would like them to stay in place so that they can be used as human shields. The latest estimates are that over 500,000 residents, probably over 600,000 residents, have now left the city, with another 500,000 or so still there. Another major issue surrounding all of this is the remaining Israeli hostages. Israeli intelligence estimates that at least 20 hostages are still alive, with another 28 having died in captivity. Hamas has control of the remains of some of those who have died in captivity, while they claim that the remains of others are buried beneath the rubble of buildings and/or tunnels that collapsed on top of them during the fighting. There might be some truth to that, I don't know. In the chaos that has characterized the last 23 months in the Gaza Strip, it's not hard to believe that the locations of some of these remains have been lost and we'll never know for sure. Hamas seemed to lean into that idea by publishing a poster over the weekend showing the faces of all 48 remaining hostages with the name Ran Arad under them. Ran Arad and his pilot Ishai Aviram were forced to bail out of their severely damaged F-4 Phantom jet over southern Lebanon on October 16, 1986. I'll never forget that. Aviram was rescued a few hours later, but Arad was captured by Amal, one of the armed factions in Lebanon. There are excellent reasons to believe that he died in 1988, but the circumstances of his death are unclear, and the location where he was buried is unknown. The Ran Arad case is therefore an open wound in Israel's national consciousness, and Hamas knows that, and that's why they're putting out this poster. They want the Israeli public to feel like they're about to lose all hope of ever finding out what happened to all these hostages, so the public will pressure the government to end the offensive in Gaza City. That almost certainly won't work, my friends, but it's one more national trauma that Israelis are having to face, and I'm afraid it won't be the last. That's because the Houthis in Yemen, I can't believe they're still around, are continuing to fire rockets and drones at Israeli cities. This past week, a drone managed to penetrate Israeli defenses and hit a hotel in the resort city of Eilat on the southern tip of Israel. To this can be added yet another rocket attack from northern Gaza at the Israeli city of Ashdod this past Sunday. One of the rockets was intercepted while the other landed in an open area. Now, this was the first rocket attack on Ashdod since early April, but nonetheless, it's a reminder that this threat has not gone away. So that's all the news from the kinetic war fronts, unless you count Iran itself, where things just keep going from bad to worse for the Ayatollah regime, leading to hopes that the regime might finally fall and allow for something better to emerge in its place. I want to give permission to you, Mr. Ayatollah, resign now before it's too late. Well, however, there are also fears that the regime might try to divert attention from its internal problems by launching new strikes on Israel, either direct ballistic missile strikes or indirect terror attacks. Speaking of terrorist attacks, this past week saw a shooting attack at the Allenby Bridge, many of you are familiar with, leaving 2 Israeli soldiers fatally wounded. Now, the attacker arrived at the crossing in a truck, one of the many coming into Israel from Jordan carrying humanitarian aid meant to be delivered to the Gaza Strip. Well, we can't be sure if Iran was involved in this attack, but it's not unlikely. There was one more piece of good news, though, in this context this past week, as the Iron Beam laser system developed by Israel's Rafael defense systems has been declared fully operational and will be deployed to defend against short-range rockets, artillery, and mortar shells by the end of October. Now, according to reports, it's already intercepted dozens of rockets, drones, and other incoming weapons during this war. And that's great news for Israeli taxpayers because the cost of an interception using this system is only about $3 to $5, as opposed to the Iron Dome, which cost at least $50,000 for every interception. Now that's good news and it makes Israel safer, but the need for shelters and protected spaces is still great and on my mind. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we're continuing to place bomb safety shelters in communities all over the country, in Arab villages, kibbutzim, at sports facilities, bus stops, and many other places. And by the way, we've also already donated back to Israel 14 brand new ambulances, 1 bloodmobile, and also 4 metacycles. So if you want to contribute in that way, just please watch this short video about this project, about the safety shelters. But remember, we're also doing other things for paramedics and the medical field in this nation. God bless you and shalom. After October 7th, 2023, which was considered the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, security teams were devastated along the southern border of Israel. From October 8th onwards, also Hezbollah in Lebanon, a terror group, also attacked in the northern part of Israel. Security teams turned to Vision for Israel for extra aid and help, and many of the items that we provided were ceramic vests for security teams to avoid bullet wounds as well as shrapnel wounds. We also needed to provide proper helmets. Most of these security teams had outdated equipment that hadn't been replaced in decades. In addition to that, there was a request for medic bags and defibrillators and for all sorts of medical disposables that were needed. Then as a result of these rocket attacks, also fires were erupting, and so we were requested to provide firefighting equipment and generators and protective clothing in order to put out these fires. And so Vision for Israel is very happy to come alongside the civilian security teams, the community security teams. We even bought a new police vehicle for one of the southern cities and dedicated it together with the mayor. It was in the city of Sderot, which was badly hit during the first days of the war, and the requests keep coming in, and we will continue to keep providing. Welcome back, friends. Now we're almost out of time for this report, so I'll just briefly hit some of the other big stories coming out of Israel this week. The UN has done something right for a change and published a report in which they finally admit what Israel has been saying for months, that much of the humanitarian aid that gets sent into the Gaza Strip ends up getting stolen, that's right, stolen by Hamas. UNICEF in particular pointed a finger at Hamas for taking several aid shipments at gunpoint and otherwise threatening their staff in Gaza. UN personnel also reported over the weekend that they had been shot at by Palestinian attackers in the course of trying to deliver humanitarian aid. And this is remarkable considering the fact that the UN rarely, if ever, has anything negative to say about Hamas or any other armed Palestinian faction. In other news, the Wall Street Journal reported this week that the Trump administration has asked Congress for approval of a package of military equipment to Israel adding up to a little over $6 billion. This reportedly includes 30 new AH-64 Apache helicopters and 3,250 infantry assault vehicles, which would substantially add to the IDF's mobility. Now, if, as expected, Congress approves the deal, this equipment should start arriving in Israel in the next 2 to 3 years. Something that might happen much sooner is the suspension of a free trade agreement with the European Union. This move, which EU officials insist is not being taken to punish Israel for winning the war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but merely to improve the humanitarian situation there, will cost Israeli exporters billions of euros. That will almost certainly trickle down to ordinary Israeli workers in the form of layoffs and other problems. And by the way, Mr. EU out there, that affects not just Jewish workers, but also Arab workers. So you're affecting the Arab economy amongst the Arab peoples here as well, not just the Jewish Israelis. So once again, I ask all of you out there, if you want to help Vision for Israel provide financial relief for some of the many Israeli families, Jewish and Arab alike, who need it, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. Another story I have to tell you about is the rise of an absurd conspiracy theory about how Israel was involved in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This nonsense appears to have originated with Candace Owens, who else, who has become an obsessive critic of Israel. But it's also been picked up by some other conservative influencers, including, to my personal disappointment, the brilliant satirical comedian J.P. Sears, as well as others. Prime Minister Netanyahu posted a video in English to deny these rumors, but they persist. I can only say for myself that in a world where Israel has so many enemies and detractors, it would be very strange if the Mossad decided to bump off one of the few strong pro-Israel voices that speak up for our defense. Of course, the thing about conspiracy theories is that they're not required to make logical sense at all. As a side note to all of this, J.P. Sears often speaks about his personal faith in Jesus Christ, and it's possible that he simply never had anyone explain the importance of Israel from the scriptures. So if any of our viewers think they could convince him to watch the Derek Prince video I mentioned earlier, please do so, or get them to watch the VFI News on your channel or anywhere on social media. Send it to Kirk Cameron while you're at it, as he also recently posted a video in which he displayed a disappointingly poor understanding of the subject. Well, now we're almost out of time, but as usual, I want to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news, and this week I have 2 items. First, the Sea of Galilee is enjoying a very healthy level this summer, despite the fact that last winter saw lower than usual levels of rainfall. That's because a project to bring desalinated water from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Galilee is working exactly as it was designed to. But the other big piece of good news is that this week we're celebrating Rosh Hashanah, also known as the Feast of Trumpets, the first of the fall high holy days. Next up is Yom Kippur, followed by Sukkot. And then it'll be Thanksgiving and Hanukkah and that other holiday that becomes so controversial I don't even want to say its name out loud right now, but will later. But I hope you will enjoy all these holidays, and I'm sure you will. On that note, I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of the VFI News from Israel.